Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. Have you ever seen a $150,000 clubhouse get cut in half by a 10-foot industrial fence? That's exactly what happened when this Karen HOA president decided to build a luxury lounge on land she didn't own, my land. She thought she could bully me into selling, but she didn't realize I had a surveyor, a lawyer, and a very mean plan. Curious how I forced a whole neighborhood to pay for her mistake? I need to tell you about the most satisfying year of my entire life. It involves a piece of land, an entitled HOA board, and about $150,000 worth of mistakes. So here is the background. I own a 1-acre lot in what used to be a pretty quiet, semi-rural area about 40 minutes outside the city. My grandfather bought that land back in the 70s for practically nothing. It was just empty farmland back then, and he always talked about building a little retirement cabin there someday. Never got around to it, though. He passed away about 15 years ago and left it to my dad, who then left it to me when he died 5 years back. Now here is where it gets interesting. About 12 years ago, some big developer bought up all the land surrounding my grandfather's lot. I mean everything. Hundreds of acres. They built this massive upscale suburban neighborhood with big houses, fancy street lights, a community pool, the whole 9 yards. Property values out there went through the roof. The developer tried to buy my grandfather's lot multiple times, offered him decent money too. But my grandfather was stubborn as hell and he just did not like being pushed around. He told them no every single time. Eventually they gave up and just built around him. So now my lot sits right in the middle of this fancy development like a missing tooth. The HOA out there has tried to claim my property falls under their rules more times than I can count. I get their threatening letters maybe 3 or 4 times a year. Usually it is about my grass being too long or about this little wildflower section I let grow near the back corner. I think it looks nice and it is completely legal, but apparently it offends their sense of suburban perfection. Every time they send me one of those notices, I just write "not a member" across it in red marker and drop it back in their office mailbox. This has been going on for years. They have never been able to do anything about it because the land ownership is crystal clear. My property deed predates their entire development by decades. I live about 2 hours away for work, so I only visit the lot once a month or so. Usually I just mow the grass, check that nobody has messed with my survey markers, and then head back home. I have been planning to maybe build something there eventually or sell it when the market is right, but for now it just sits there. The property taxes are cheap and it is a good investment. So, anyway, I drove out there on a Saturday morning in late April for my monthly check. It was one of those perfect spring days where everything smells like cut grass and flowers. I pulled up to my lot and immediately knew something was very wrong. There was a full construction crew on my land. I am talking concrete trucks, a framing crew, piles of lumber, the works. They had already poured this absolutely massive concrete slab that stretched from the HOA's community center building clear across my property line. I could see the slab crossed onto my land by at least 15 feet, maybe more. My first instinct was to lose my mind and start yelling, but I stopped myself. Getting mad at construction workers who are just doing their job is pointless. These guys were not the decision makers. So instead, I just walked up to the site like a curious neighbor. I found the foreman pretty easily. He was this older guy with a sun-weathered face, holding a clipboard and barking instructions at his crew. I walked up and said, "Hey," asked what they were building. He looked at me like I was an idiot and said they were putting up the new premium residence lounge and outdoor kitchen for the HOA. Said it was going to have a full bar, pizza oven, the works. He seemed pretty proud of it, actually. I asked him who hired them and he told me the HOA board approved the whole project. Then he went back to yelling at someone about rebar placement. I did not say anything else. I just started taking pictures. Lots of pictures. High-resolution photos of the concrete slab, the survey markers that were clearly visible on my property, the construction equipment sitting on my land, everything. I even got a few shots of the blueprint that was sitting on the tailgate of one of the trucks. You could see the property line marked clear as day on those plans, and their building crossed right over it. The foreman noticed me taking pictures and asked what I was doing. I just smiled and said I was documenting the community improvements for my records. He shrugged and went back to work. I spent about an hour there taking photos from every possible angle. Then I drove straight to the HOA office, which was in a little building near the community pool. The woman at the front desk told me the board president was available and asked if I wanted to schedule an appointment. I said no thanks, I would wait. She looked annoyed but told me to have a seat. I sat in their lobby for maybe 20 minutes before the board president came out. She was this woman in her 50s, very put together, wearing expensive casual clothes that probably cost more than my car payment. She had this smile that was all teeth and no warmth. She asked how she could help me, and I told her I wanted to discuss the construction project happening on my property. The smile vanished pretty quick. She told me to come into her office. Once we were sitting down, she folded her hands on her desk and explained to me in this very condescending voice that the board had decided to expand the community center to better serve the residents. She said my little eyesore lot was finally being put to community use, and I should really be grateful because it would boost my property value. I told her that was great, except the building was on my land without my permission. She actually laughed. Then she said that because my lot was completely surrounded by HOA property, it fell under something called implied easement for the greater good of the community. I am not a lawyer, but even I knew that was complete nonsense. I told her that was not how property rights work, and she needed to stop construction immediately. She waved her hand at me like she was brushing away a fly, told me the community had tolerated my neglected lot for long enough, and that this project was moving forward whether I liked it or not. Then she suggested that if I was smart, I would just accept reality and maybe the board would even let me use the facilities once they were complete. I sat there for a second just staring at her. Then I stood up, thanked her for her time, and left. I went straight home and called a real estate attorney that afternoon, told him the whole situation. He listened and then said something that made me very happy. He said this was the most clear-cut case of trespassing and property encroachment he had seen in years. He told me I could probably stop them immediately with a cease and desist, but he also suggested I might want to let them dig themselves in a little deeper first. I liked how this lawyer thought. We drafted up a formal cease and desist letter that laid out exactly why what they were doing was illegal. I sent it via certified mail so there would be proof they received it. The letter was very clear. It stated that construction on my property must stop immediately, that all materials and structures must be removed, and that failure to comply would result in legal action. The HOA received the letter on a Wednesday. By Friday, I got a response from their attorney. Their lawyer sent back this incredibly aggressive letter claiming that my lot fell under their jurisdiction due to negligent maintenance and that they were going to file paperwork to annex my property into the HOA. The letter said if I continued to interfere with community improvements, they would pursue legal action against me for harassment. My attorney read their response and actually started laughing. He said their lawyer was either incompetent or had not bothered to do even basic research on the property history. He told me to just sit tight and let them keep going, so that is exactly what I did. I drove out there the next weekend and construction had not slowed down one bit. If anything, they had accelerated. The building was framed now and they were putting up these custom stone veneer walls. I could see the outdoor fireplace taking shape and they were installing this fancy outdoor kitchen setup with stainless steel everything. I took more pictures, lots more pictures. By the third week of May, the building was basically done. They had put in this gorgeous outdoor bar area, a full commercial-grade pizza oven, and this massive stone fireplace. I am talking probably $150,000 worth of construction minimum, maybe more. I made one more visit to the HOA office, asked to see the board president again. She seemed surprised to see me, but agreed to talk. This time she was way more smug, told me the project was nearly complete, and implied that I had missed my chance to be reasonable about the whole thing. I asked her if she was absolutely sure she wanted to continue with a building that sat on property she did not own. She told me the community had spoken, the project was approved, and there was nothing I could do about it. Then she actually suggested I should probably just sell her my lot at this point for a reasonable price since it was now partially developed anyway. I told her I would think about it and left. That night I called my attorney and told him I was ready to move forward. He said perfect timing because he had already drawn up all the paperwork we would need. The next morning I hired a licensed surveyor to come out and place new survey markers along my entire property line. Not the little metal stakes you usually see. I had him use these bright neon pink high visibility markers that stood about 4 feet tall. They were impossible to miss. The survey crew placed them exactly on the property line, which meant several of them went right through the middle of the HOA's new building. One marker was literally in the middle of their fancy outdoor fireplace. Another was right through the bar area. The HOA's grand opening was scheduled for the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend. They had posted about it all over their neighborhood social media. Big celebration, ribbon cutting, the whole thing. I waited until Friday afternoon, the day before their event. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first call was to the county building inspector's office. I explained that there was a structure built on my property without my permission and without proper permits. The inspector said he would send someone out first thing Monday morning. The second call was to a fencing company. I told them I needed an emergency installation and I was willing to pay premium rates for weekend work. The owner was hesitant until I explained what was happening. Then he thought it was hilarious and agreed to do it. Saturday morning at 7 a.m., the fencing crew showed up with a truck full of materials. I met them at the property and showed them exactly where the survey markers were. They spent the next 6 hours installing a 10-foot-tall industrial chain-link fence right along my property line. The kind of fence you see around construction sites or impound lots. It was not pretty, but it was extremely effective. The fence went right through the middle of the HOA's new building. The outdoor kitchen ended up on my side of the fence. The fancy bar area was cut in half. You could not access about 40% of the structure without being on my property, which was now completely fenced off. I put up no trespassing signs every 10 feet along the fence. Big, bright red ones. The HOA's grand opening was supposed to start at 2 p.m. I watched from my car parked on the street as people started arriving around noon to set up. The first person to notice the fence was one of the board members. I watched him walk around the corner of the building and just stop dead in his tracks. His mouth literally fell open. Then he started yelling for other people to come look. Within minutes, there was a whole crowd gathered around the fence. I could hear people shouting even from where I sat. Someone ran to get the board president. When she arrived and saw the fence, her face went through about 5 different shades of red. She started screaming at the fence crew who were still there finishing up some posts. They just ignored her and kept working. She pulled out her phone and I assumed she was calling their attorney. She spent about 20 minutes on the phone pacing back and forth and gesturing wildly at the fence. By 1 p.m., the grand opening had been quietly canceled. They took down all the decorations and banners. People were standing around in little groups looking confused and angry. I went home feeling pretty satisfied. Monday morning, the county building inspector showed up right on schedule. My attorney met him there, which was perfect because it made everything official. The inspector took one look at the situation and immediately understood what had happened. He checked the survey markers, reviewed the property records my attorney had brought, and then started taking his own photos. After about an hour, he posted a big red stop work order on what was left of the accessible part of the building. The order stated that construction had been performed on property without proper ownership or permits, and the entire structure was in violation of county building codes. The HOA's attorney showed up about an hour later. He and my attorney had a very interesting conversation that I watched from a distance. I could not hear everything, but I saw the HOA's lawyer's face go from confident to confused to what looked like panic as my attorney walked him through the property records and survey documentation. That week, my attorney filed a lawsuit against the HOA for trespass, property damage, and permanent encroachment. We were not messing around. The filing included all my photos, the survey documentation, copies of the cease and desist letter they had ignored, and even their own aggressive response letter. The HOA tried to fight it at first. Their attorney filed a response claiming all sorts of things about implied easements and community benefit. None of it held up. It took about 4 months to work through the court system. During that time, the fancy new building just sat there, half inaccessible behind my fence. I heard through various sources that the HOA had suspended all community events and was dealing with a lot of angry homeowners who wanted to know why their dues were funding a building nobody could use. In late September, we had our day in court. The judge took about 15 minutes to review everything and then asked the HOA's attorney if he had any actual legal basis for building on someone else's property. The attorney tried to argue about the greater good and community benefit. The judge cut him off and asked again if there was any legal basis. The attorney admitted there was not. The judge ruled in my favor on every single point. Not only did the HOA have to stop claiming any rights to my property, they were ordered to remove every bit of the structure from my land and restore it to its original condition. The judge also awarded me damages for the trespass and required them to pay my legal fees. Here's where it gets really good though, because the HOA had willfully ignored my cease and desist letter and continued construction knowing they were trespassing. The judge said their actions were negligent and possibly malicious. That meant they could not claim any of it as an innocent mistake. The final order required them to demolish the entire building, not just the part on my land, the whole thing. Because you cannot have half a building and the structure had been designed as one piece, it all had to come down. The demolition happened in October. I drove out to watch. It took them 3 days to tear down everything they had just built 6 months earlier. The cost of demolition plus restoration of my land plus my legal fees came to about $85,000, and that was on top of the original construction costs. The HOA had to pay for all of it out of their reserve fund. Problem was, their reserve fund was not big enough. They had already depleted it building the structure in the first place. So in November, every single homeowner in that development got a special assessment notice. Their monthly HOA dues were tripling to rebuild the reserve fund and cover the legal costs. I heard the neighborhood absolutely exploded. People were furious. They started demanding answers about how this happened and who approved the project. They wanted to know why nobody had bothered to verify they actually owned the land before building on it. The December HOA meeting was apparently complete chaos. I was not there, obviously, but I heard about it from multiple sources. Homeowners were screaming at the board. People were demanding resignations. Someone called for a vote of no confidence. The board president tried to defend her decisions by saying she was acting in the best interest of the community. That did not go over well. Someone pointed out that tripling everyone's dues while having nothing to show for it was not exactly beneficial. By January, the entire board had been replaced. The former board president ended up having to sell her house. Apparently, between the special assessment and some personal liability issues that came up during the legal process, she could not afford to stay. I guess the new board decided to pursue some kind of action against the old board members for gross negligence, though I do not know all the details on that. As for me, my lot is exactly the way it was before, except now it has a very nice fence around it and a permanent sign near the road that says private property, not an HOA member, have a nice day. I had that sign professionally made and it cost me about $200. Best money I ever spent. The funny thing is my property value actually went up through all this. Turns out being the only lot in a fancy development that does not have HOA dues or restrictions is pretty attractive to certain buyers. I have had a few people approach me about selling, offering way more than the lot is probably worth. I am not selling though. That land meant something to my grandfather and it means something to me. Plus, I really like having a little piece of property where nobody can tell me what to do with it. The new HOA board has been extremely polite to me. They send me a courtesy notification whenever they are doing any work near my property line, which is way more than they are legally required to do. I think they are terrified I might sue them if they so much as look at my land the wrong way. I still visit once a month to mow and maintain things. Sometimes I see neighbors walking by and they wave. Some of them have actually thanked me for what happened because apparently the old board was terrible and had been getting away with all kinds of questionable stuff for years. My lawsuit basically forced the community to clean house. The lot where the building used to be is just grass now. They sodded it over and turned it into a little park area. There is a bench and everything. It is kinda nice actually, and it is entirely on their side of the property line. I do not know what I will eventually do with my land. Maybe I will build something someday. Maybe I will just keep it as is. But whatever I decide, it will be my choice and nobody else's. The whole experience taught me something important about standing your ground. My grandfather knew what he was doing when he refused to sell. He understood that sometimes the best thing you can own is something nobody else can control. I think about him sometimes when I am out there mowing the grass. I think he would have gotten a huge kick out of this whole mess. He always did like watching entitled people learn hard lessons. The wildflower patch is doing great, by the way. It is even bigger now than it was before. And nobody has sent me any more violation notices about it. Funny how that works. So that is my story about how an HOA built a $150,000 clubhouse on my land and then had to tear it all down. Would I have handled anything differently? Honestly, no. Every single step went exactly the way it should have. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is just letting people face the consequences of their own bad decisions. The HOA board made their choices. They ignored multiple warnings. They pushed forward knowing they were in the wrong. And in the end, they paid the price for all of it. My only regret is that I did not get to see the board president's face when she realized her fancy new building was going to be demolished. That must have been something special, but I did get to keep my land, watch justice get served, and not pay a single HOA due. In my book, that is a pretty good outcome. Plus, I got a really great story out of it that I will be telling for years. The moral here, if there is one, is pretty simple. Know your property rights. Stand your ground when you are in the right. And never assume you can just take what does not belong to you without facing the consequences. Oh, and if you are ever thinking about building something, maybe do a survey first. Just a thought. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Most of my stories of malicious compliance seem to come from 3 jobs. This is another from when I was working in IT at the college. It had been decided the world would be a better place if 2 of our campuses were merged into one. They were only a mile apart and the new site was 3 miles away, so there wasn't a big location issue. Sure, some people had a harder commute, but some got an easier commute. It's kind of equitable when you think about it. To make the new build a rousing success, there would be consultations and people would be consulted and everyone would be listened to. Yeah. You know that didn't happen without me telling you, don't you? Each department was to send a representative to the new build consultation group. Despite my best efforts to stay quiet or even absent every time the subject of a mandatory volunteer came up, I got voluntold to go. I, in all my mid-level position glory, was to represent IT fine. I really didn't want to take part in a farce of a consultation, so all the mistakes could be labeled as unforeseeable. But if you're going to send a professional fault finder to a consultation, I hope you have a full load of ink in that pen. The meeting comprised 5 people from different departments and Susan, who worked in facilities, so had been given the job of managing the new builds. No one seemed to think there was a significant difference between booking rooms for training courses, making sure coffee and lunch breaks were catered, and making a multi-million-pound building come into existence and transfer hundreds of staff and thousands of students over to it. After introductions, top of the agenda was parking. To be fair, I think it was smart to start with the contentious issue. Parking was already a problem, and the rumor was there would be less parking at the new site. This would be solved, apparently, by not having any student parking, ignoring the inconvenience this would cause, and questions over the public transport suitability. There was already not enough staff parking. So how was screwing over another group help us? After a bit of vague details about somehow rewarding car sharing, we were furnished with the magnus opus of technology that would solve all our issues, a gate with number plate recognition. This would stop all those pesky outsiders coming over here and stealing all our spots, something that had never been an issue. I'd been quiet until this point as I thought it all a bit daft, and I was formulating a plan out of the job anyway, so these issues were unlikely to affect me much. But now we had hit on some technology, I felt the need to chime in. I let the others ask their questions to understand how a number plate recognition gate works. For those not aware, it's a barrier with a camera. When you pull up, it reads the number plate on the front of your car. All cars have a very standardized white front number plate in the UK, translates that picture to letters and numbers, looks it up in a database, and if it finds a match, it opens the barrier. Once everyone understood the technology, I opened up with the problems in their happy path only thinking. OP. So Jan and I, points thumb at unsuspecting woman sat next to me, car share every day and she drives. But today her car is broken, so we take mine. What happens when we get to the gate? Susan. What do you mean? OP. My number plate won't be in the system, so what happens? Susan. Well, it could be, even if you don't drive normally. OP. That assumes a level of preparation. What if it's an emergency? Susan. There will be a call button. You can speak to someone to get let in. I ignored the likelihood of that call system being managed, instead focusing on the loophole she'd just opened. OP. So I'll just be let into this carefully controlled car park with limited spaces based on my say-so? Susan. OP. And you said I could have my number plate in the system. Susan. Yes. Please to not be talking about the space issue again. OP. Which one? Susan. Which what? OP. Which number plate? I have 2. Susan. You do? OP. Yes. Susan. Why? OP. Because it's illegal to use the same number plate on different vehicles. Susan. Oh, right. OP. So can the system cope with more than one number plate? Susan. I'll check on that. While she took a note about the multiple vehicle issue, I reloaded. OP. Great. What if my other vehicle is a motorbike? Susan. I don't think that will be a problem. OP. Yes, but I'm guessing the camera is on the gate and looking at the front? Susan. Yes. OP. Motorbikes don't have front number plates. How will it read it and let me in? Susan. I'll check. She then wrote another note and brought the meeting to an end, sitting time. A few weeks later, I heard from someone that there had been another new build consultation group meeting. I hadn't been invited. Mission accomplished. Post note. The first winter at the new campus, 6 months after I'd left, I heard from ex-colleagues that the incline to the car park gate was so steep that when the first hint of ice turned up, nobody could get up to and stop at the gate long enough for it to open before they started sliding back down into anyone following them. The next one is an entitled People Story. From 2021 to 2024, IF was living in an apartment, and at the time I had this roommate who I will call Katie F, who moved in mid-2022. At first, and by that I mean for like the first year, things with Katie were okay, but after the first year, things started going downhill. In early 2023, Katie lost her job after the business she worked for closed down, and for 2 months, she was unemployed looking for work. For that time, I did agree to take on the $800 rent, but even after she found work, she adamantly stated that she'd only be capping her contribution to only $300, leaving me covering $500. Even then, she'd still sometimes be late on her half of the rent due to her having other bills to cover instead. Additionally, she always left dirty dishes on the sink, didn't take the trash out, but rather leaving it by the door. She'd eat my meal prep, even sometimes having the audacity of telling me what food she likes and low-key urging me to cook her preferred foods instead, and other stuff which just got on my nerves. Katie essentially needed me to clean up after her, sometimes drive her to appointments, and cover bills that she should have been covering. Every time I would try to bring up these issues, at first she did listen, or so I thought, and she'd agreed to do better with the chores and making good on her payments. However, later on she just started acting dismissively about it, not engage or would even roll her eyes at me. On January 2024, after visiting family in California, my mom is American and half my family lives there, I came back to find that her brother, who I'll call Kyle, M, moved in, and Katie allowed him to stay over without even at least telling me first about it. Apparently Kyle moved here from Manitoba to try and look for work. Kyle ended up staying 3 months, turning the living room into his bedroom, with the two of us, or really just me I suppose, ended up having to cover the additional costs as well. Anyway, my lease was ending on June 2024, and on March 2024, my grandpa, M, allowed me and my fiancée, now wife, yes I'm bi, Haley, F, to move into his house in Markham, which I'm set to inherit according to his will. Because of this, I obviously decided I wasn't going to renew my lease for June, and I told my landlord about this as well, which he was cool with. I also told Katie that I wasn't going to be renewing my lease, and I'll be moving into my grandpa's house. However, before I could go into more detail, Katie jumped in saying she wanted to come over to pick out a room for herself in my grandpa's house and asked, "When are we moving out?" Apparently, she had this idea that she was going to be moving in with me when my lease ends. I told Katie that given that I'm moving out, she will need to find a new roommate, work out her own budget on how she'll cover the rent and utilities, and yes, I clarified that no, she will not be moving in with me. I will be moving in with my fiancée, now my wife, in the house my grandpa owns. Katie then went on to complain, saying that she won't be able to cover the rent herself, hence why I recommended she find a new roommate and work out a budget. Told me that given her work, she'll be too busy to clean the apartment if she were to stay, hence she wanted us to share the load, meaning I take care of the house chores, and trying to argue that since I'm going to be living in a house that is already paid off anyway, that for some reason means I should take Katie in as well as to her. That is fair. Now, I told her this back in March so she'd have ample time to make arrangement, and I assured her that I will still cover my half of the rent, even if I move out before the June 30 deadline, but between me telling her and me actually moving out in late April, Katie still insisted that I should let her move into my grandpa's house as well. I in turn kept telling her why I cannot do that. Anyway, as I mentioned, I moved out of the apartment on April, informed my former landlord of what I discussed with Katie, and I left the apartment a few weeks before the June 30 deadline. For a couple more weeks after June 30th, Katie still DM'd me, wanting to talk about her moving in with me. To summarize the DMs she sent me, she basically said that since I'm now living in a house that has 4 bedrooms and is paid off, then there shouldn't be an issue with me taking her, Katie, in, and according to her, it's a perfect solution, as since the house was paid off, she said that neither of us need to pay rent, meaning she saw this as a way of not only moving into a bigger property, but she expected to live free of any costs. Katie did eventually find another roommate to live with her for a while, but from her Facebook posts, it seems as though she ended up moving back to Manitoba to live with her parents. Just been sitting on this story for a while, so figured I'd share it. The next one is an entitled People Story. Growing up, my grandfather was always a fascinating figure in my life. He had a way of captivating us with his stories of his travels and adventures when he was young. He was always full of energy and life, but there was always one story that he never shared with us. He would always give us a sly grin and say, "I'll tell you when the time is right." Unfortunately, that time never came as he passed away before he could share this particular tale. After his passing, we were all grieving, but it was especially hard for my father. He was my grandfather's eldest son and had always been close to him. It was tough for him to deal with the loss of his father, and it affected him deeply. However, a few months after my grandfather's death, we received the news that he had left us something in his will. We were excited to see what he had left us, but we were also filled with a sense of sadness, as it was a painful reminder that he was no longer with us. We sat down with the executor of his will, who handed us an envelope that contained a map and a letter from my grandfather. The letter explained that the map led to a treasure he had hidden many years ago. He had always wanted to share this story with us, but he wanted to wait until he was sure we were ready to handle it. The map led us to an old, run-down house on the outskirts of town. The house was abandoned, and it looked like it had been that way for many years. The map led us to a particular spot in the house, and as we began to dig, we found a small box buried in the dirt. It was locked, but luckily we found the key on the map. As we opened the box, we found a letter from my grandfather that explained the significance of the treasure. He had been a soldier in World War II and had been stationed in Germany. During his time there, he had come across a stash of gold coins that had been buried by the Nazis. He had taken some of the coins and hidden them away in that box. We were all shocked and excited by this discovery, but we also knew that we had to be careful. We didn't want to attract attention to ourselves or the treasure, so we agreed to keep it a secret and divide it amongst ourselves. Years went by and we all went our separate ways, but the memory of that treasure stayed with us. One day, my sister and I decided to revisit the house and see if there was anything else we could find. As we made our way through the house, we stumbled upon a locked door. We knew we had to find a way to get it open, so we searched high and low until we found the key. As we opened the door, we found ourselves in a room filled with treasure. There were jewels, gold coins, and stacks of cash. We couldn't believe it. We had hit the jackpot. We quickly filled our bags with as much treasure as we could carry and made our way out of the house. However, as we were about to leave, we heard footsteps behind us. We turned around to find 2 men who had followed us into the house. They demanded that we hand over the treasure, but we refused. We tried to make a run for it, but the men were faster and stronger. They tackled us to the ground, and we struggled to fight them off. Just as we thought it was all over, a police car pulled up, and the men fled. The police officers helped us up and took a statement from us. We told them everything, and they promised to investigate. We made our way back home, shaken but relieved that we had made it out alive. Over the next few weeks, we received updates from the police. They had managed to track down the men who had attacked us and had arrested them. They had also recovered a significant amount of stolen goods from the men, which included items from other burglaries they had committed. It turned out that they were part of a larger criminal ring that had been operating in the area for years. The police also asked us to provide more information about the treasure we had found. We gave them all the details we could remember and explained that it had belonged to my grandfather. The police were impressed by the story and told us that they would do their best to investigate the origins of the treasure. Months went by, and we had almost forgotten about the treasure and the police investigation until we received a phone call from a detective. He told us that they had managed to track down the origins of the treasure and had discovered that it had been stolen from a museum during World War II. The treasure had been looted by the Nazis and had been missing for decades. The detective also told us that the museum was grateful for our assistance in recovering the stolen items, and that they had decided to award us a small portion of the value of the treasure as a reward. We were thrilled and felt honored to have been part of something so significant. The money we received from the museum reward was significant, and we decided to donate a portion of it to a local charity that helped war veterans. It felt like the right thing to do, and we knew that it was something that my grandfather would have been proud of. The rest of the money was divided amongst us, and we used it to pay off our debts and invest in our futures. We made sure to honor my grandfather's memory and use the treasure for good. Looking back on everything that had happened, we realized that the treasure had brought us closer together as a family. It had also given us an opportunity to help others and make a difference in the world. We knew that my grandfather would have been proud of us, and we were grateful for the experiences that we had shared. In conclusion, the discovery of my grandfather's secret treasure led us on an unexpected adventure that taught us valuable lessons about life, family, and the importance of doing what is right. We learned that sometimes the greatest treasures in life are the ones that cannot be measured in material wealth. We will always cherish the memories of this incredible journey and the legacy of my grandfather that inspired it. In my opinion, this story about the discovery of the grandfather's secret treasure was quite intriguing. The way the treasure was hidden away for years and the excitement of finding it really caught my attention. The addition of the dramatic twist with the two men trying to steal the treasure and the police investigation added an extra layer of suspense to the story. I also appreciated the update on how the family used the treasure for good and the significance of the treasure's origins. The next story is titled, The Battle Against My Negligent Neighbor, How I Fought for My Rights and Won. Living in a peaceful neighborhood is a dream for many of us. However, it can quickly turn into a nightmare when one negligent neighbor can disrupt the tranquility of an entire street. Unfortunately, this is what happened to me when my new neighbor moved in next door. At first, everything seemed fine. My neighbors seemed friendly enough, but it wasn't long before I realized that they were complete slobs. Their backyard was littered with trash, and it wasn't just bags of garbage, but old furniture, toys, and other discarded items. The stench was unbearable, and the sight of it made me feel anxious and angry. After several attempts to talk to my neighbor about the issue, they promised to clean up their backyard, but nothing ever changed. Finally, I decided to take action and hired a lawyer to write a letter demanding that they clean up their yard or face legal consequences. They ignored the letter and continued to neglect their property. As the days passed, things only got worse. I noticed that they had started burning their trash in their backyard, causing the air to be filled with a thick black smoke that could be seen from far away. When I confronted them about it, they shrugged it off as if it was no big deal. One afternoon, as I was sitting in my backyard, I smelled something burning. I looked over and saw that my fence was on fire. I quickly called COP and the fire department arrived promptly, putting out the fire before it spread to the rest of my property. When I spoke to the firefighters, they informed me that the fire had been started by my neighbor's careless burning of trash in their backyard. The flames had spread to my fence, causing extensive damage. I was angry, frustrated, and scared. I had no idea what my neighbor was capable of, and I didn't want to live next to someone who was so reckless and negligent. I called my lawyer and started the legal process of suing my neighbor for the damages caused to my property. It was a long and grueling process. We had to go through several rounds of mediation and negotiations before my neighbor agreed to settle the case out of court. They agreed to pay for the damages and promised to clean up their yard. I thought that this was the end of it. However, a few months later, I received a notice from the city that my neighbor had violated several city ordinances regarding property maintenance, trash disposal, and fire safety. The city had fined them thousands of dollars, and they were now being sued by the city for violating these ordinances. The neighbor ended up losing the case and was ordered to pay hefty fines and do community service. They also had to clean up their backyard and bring it up to code. They finally sold their property and moved out of the neighborhood. In the end, I was relieved to have won the battle against my negligent neighbor. But the experience had left me wary of new neighbors and more vigilant about protecting my property. I have since installed security cameras and worked with my community to make sure that everyone is aware of the importance of maintaining their properties and keeping our neighborhoods safe. As an update, I've heard from the new owners of my former neighbor's property, and they have made significant improvements to their backyard, making it an enjoyable space for all to enjoy. In my opinion, this story is a great reminder of how important it is to maintain our properties and be respectful of our neighbors. It's unfortunate that the situation had to escalate to legal action, but I can understand why the author felt they had no other choice. It's also great to hear that the new neighbors have taken it upon themselves to improve their backyard and be good members of the community. Overall, it's a cautionary tale of how negligence and carelessness can have serious consequences, and how standing up for our rights can make a positive difference. The next story is titled, When Revenge Gets the Last Laugh, a Cautionary Tale. Renting a house was supposed to be a dream come true for me. I had always lived in cramped apartments, and the idea of having space and privacy was exciting. But my joy was short-lived when I met my neighbor, Mike. From the moment I moved in, Mike made my life a living hell. He was in his late 40s or early 50s, and despite seeming like a fully functional adult, he had never lived outside of his parents' home. He spent every possible minute cleaning or admiring his truck, so he practically lived in the driveway. When he wasn't bragging about some a-hole move that he just pulled on someone, he was hitting on the wives and daughters of anyone on the street. But things got worse when Mike started to invade my privacy. He would sneak into my yard to peek through my windows and see what I was doing. At first, I thought it was just a one-time thing, but he kept doing it repeatedly. I was uncomfortable, but I didn't know what to do. One day, I caught him mowing my side yard. He argued that it was his property and kept insisting that he was right. I tried talking to my landlord, but he didn't seem to care. I even called the police, but they couldn't do much either. Mike seemed to get a kick out of it and kept harassing me in any way he could. It was not just me. He would stare at my guests and make comments about them. He would hit on the women in the neighborhood and even tried to talk to a 17-year-old girl. Despite numerous complaints, he didn't seem to stop. One day, he threatened to break into my house and smash my cameras and computer. That was the final straw. I decided to move out. But before leaving, I discovered that Mike was committing workers' compensation fraud and using the money to start his own landscaping business. I recorded him in action and sent the videos and pictures to the fraud department of the workers' compensation office. Months passed, and I had settled into my new place, thinking that justice had finally been served. But then, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a note that read, "You may have won this round, but be careful. Revenge can have consequences." There was no signature, and I had no idea who had sent it. I started to feel uneasy. I had no clue what those consequences could be, but the note had sent a shiver down my spine. I decided to do some digging and found out that Mike had been released from jail and was living with his parents again. However, the police also informed me that there had been a string of burglaries in my old neighborhood, and they were investigating them. I couldn't help but wonder if Mike was involved. The thought of him trying to seek revenge on me for reporting him crossed my mind. I became paranoid and started to take extra precautions, like installing more cameras and alarms. Days passed, and there was no sign of Mike. However, one day I received another package in the mail. It was a box with a note attached that read, "Enjoy your new place while you can." I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, there were photos of me taken from different angles, like someone had been stalking me. I was shocked and scared. I called the police, but they said they couldn't do anything without evidence. I had to take matters into my own hands. I decided to dig deeper into Mike's background and discovered that he had a history of stalking and harassment. I shared all the information with the police, and they finally arrested Mike for stalking and harassment. He was charged and convicted, and this time he was sent to prison for a long time. I finally breathed a sigh of relief. Mike was locked away, and I was safe. I thought I had learned my lesson and that it was over, but I was wrong. Revenge had more consequences in store for me. A few weeks after Mike's conviction, I received a call from the workers' compensation office. They informed me that they had discovered a video of me recording Mike without his consent. It was illegal to record someone without their consent, and I had violated his privacy. I was now facing criminal charges. I was devastated. I thought I had done the right thing by reporting Mike, but now I was the one in trouble. I hired a lawyer and tried to explain my side of the story, but it was too late. The court had already decided to prosecute me. The trial was long and stressful, and I had to face the consequences of my actions. In the end, I was found guilty of violating Mike's privacy and had to pay a hefty fine. It was a harsh lesson that I had to learn, and I regretted my actions deeply. Years passed, and I moved on with my life. I got married, had kids, and moved to a different state. I had almost forgotten about Mike and the revenge that had caused me so much trouble. But one day, I received another package in the mail. This time, it was a letter from Mike, who was now out of prison. He had found my address and had sent me a warning. He told me that he was coming for me and that I should be prepared. I was terrified, and I didn't know what to do. I contacted the police, but they couldn't do anything unless he showed up. I had to take matters into my own hands again. I decided to move to a more secure location and install better security systems. Months passed, and there was no sign of Mike. I had almost forgotten about the threat, but then one day I received a call from the police. They had caught Mike trying to break into my old house. He had been stalking me all this time, waiting for the right moment to strike. I was grateful that the police had caught him before he could harm me or my family. Revenge had caused me so much trouble, and I had learned my lesson the hard way. I realized that it's never worth seeking revenge, as it can lead to unintended consequences that can haunt you for a lifetime. In my opinion, When Revenge Gets the Last Laugh was a well-written cautionary tale about the consequences of seeking revenge. The story kept me engaged from start to finish, with its vivid descriptions of the protagonist's creepy neighbor, and the tension that built up over time. The unexpected twists and turns made the story even more interesting, and the second dramatic ending caught me off guard. It was a good reminder that revenge is never worth it, and that it's always better to take the high road and seek justice through proper channels. The last story is titled, Neighbors in Conflict, A Tale of Empathy and Forgiveness. I had been living in my apartment for almost a year, enjoying the peace and quiet of the suburban neighborhood. However, that all changed when a new family moved in next door. They were loud, obnoxious, and seemed to have no consideration for their neighbors. Every evening from 9 p.m. I could hear them banging pots and pans, shouting at each other, and playing loud music. It was impossible to concentrate on my work or get any rest, and I soon found myself becoming increasingly frustrated and angry. I tried talking to them about it, but they just laughed and told me to mind my own business. They seemed to take pleasure in making my life miserable, and I felt powerless to do anything about it. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a pan and began banging it loudly, hoping to annoy them as much as they had annoyed me. But instead of stopping, they just turned up the music and started screaming even louder. For weeks we were locked in a battle of wills, each side trying to outdo the other in terms of noise and disruption. I complained to the landlord, but he said there was nothing he could do unless I had proof of any wrongdoing. Finally, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I installed a camera that faced their apartment, hoping to catch them in the act of making noise. And sure enough, one night I caught them on camera, banging pots and pans and shouting at each other at the top of their lungs. I took the footage to the landlord, who was finally convinced to take action. He called the family in for a meeting and threatened to evict them if they didn't stop the noise. At first I felt a sense of satisfaction and vindication, but as the days passed, I started to feel guilty for my actions. I had never stopped to consider the reasons why they were making noise or what might be going on in their lives. One day I decided to go next door and talk to them. I knocked on the door nervously, not sure what to expect, but to my surprise, the woman who answered the door was friendly and welcoming. We started chatting, and she told me about the difficulties they had been facing lately. Her husband had lost his job, and they were struggling to make ends meet. They had a young daughter who was going through a difficult time and often acted out by making noise. The woman herself was dealing with health issues and the stress of caring for her family. As she spoke, I realized that I had been too quick to judge and seek revenge without knowing the full story. I apologized for my behavior and offered to help in any way I could. We ended up having a heart-to-heart conversation about the challenges of life and the importance of empathy and understanding. In the end, we came to an understanding, and the family promised to keep the noise down during my work meetings. I also learned to be more patient and understanding towards others, and that sometimes it's worth taking the time to listen and empathize. However, a few weeks later, the family faced an unexpected tragedy. The daughter, who had been struggling with mental health issues, had a breakdown and was hospitalized. I was shocked and saddened by the news and knew that I had to do something to help. I organized a fundraiser in the community, and with the help of my neighbors, we were able to raise enough money to cover the family's medical expenses. I also visited the hospital and offered my support, and we ended up becoming good friends. In the end, what started as a conflict between neighbors turned into a story of empathy and forgiveness. I learned that sometimes all it takes is a little bit of understanding and compassion to resolve a difficult situation. I also learned that behind every action, there is a story, and that we should always take the time to get to know our neighbors and understand their circumstances before jumping to conclusions. As time passed, the family and I developed a strong bond, and we started spending more time together. We would have dinner parties, BBQs, and even went on vacation together. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago we were at each other's throats. Looking back, I realized that our conflict had brought us closer together, and that sometimes it takes a little bit of adversity to build strong relationships. I was grateful for the lessons I had learned and the friendships I had made, and I knew that I had grown as a person because of it. Update. Several years later, I received an unexpected call from the woman next door. She sounded panicked and asked if I could come over immediately. I rushed over to their apartment and found the family in tears. The daughter, who had been struggling with mental health issues, had taken a turn for the worse and had been hospitalized again. This time it was much more serious, and the family was unsure if she would make it. I stayed with them for hours, offering my support and comfort. We prayed together, talked about old times, and reminisced about the moments that had brought us together. It was a somber but beautiful moment, and I felt grateful for the friendship we had built. Several weeks later, I received another call from the woman. This time she was crying, but they were tears of joy. The daughter had made a full recovery and was finally coming home. To celebrate, the family organized a block party, and everyone in the community was invited. It was a beautiful event, filled with music, food, and laughter. The daughter was there too, and she seemed happy and healthy, surrounded by the love and support of her family and friends. As the party wound down, the woman next door pulled me aside and handed me a small box. Inside was a bracelet handmade by her daughter as a thank you for all the support I had given them over the years. I felt tears welling up in my eyes and hugged her tightly. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the most difficult situations can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. The conflict with my noisy neighbors had brought us together, and our friendship had become a source of strength and comfort for all of us. I knew that we would always be there for each other, no matter what life threw our way. In my opinion, Neighbors in Conflict, A Tale of Empathy and Forgiveness, is a heartwarming story that reminds us of the power of understanding and compassion. It's easy to jump to conclusions and get angry when our neighbors do things that annoy us. But this story shows us that there's often more to the story than meets the eye. I love how the protagonist takes the initiative to try and resolve the conflict by installing a camera and talking to their neighbor. And the fact that they end up becoming friends and supporting each other through a difficult time is truly touching. It's a great reminder that we should always try to see things from the other person's perspective and be open to forgiveness and understanding. The next one is an entitled People Story. If you've read my previous posts, you'll know I usually have issues with the mother folks. This time, I'll give you in all the glory the biggest fool I ever had to deal with in my business of owning a comic store and selling from flea markets. The year was 1995 or 1996. Two kids, about 12 or 13, walked into my store and wanted to buy a pack of Upper Deck SPX basketball. For those of you who do not know, there was one card per pack, and it was a hologram card except for some inserts. The kid paid $5, and he selected a pack and opened it. It didn't look like a regular card, and we were confused about what it may be. I asked to see it and saw that it was an Anthony Hardaway rookie autograph redemption card. To get it, you had to mail this into Upper Deck, and they sent you an autographed card. The kid asked what the value was, and I pulled out my Beckett's price guide and looked it up. No online sites then. According to the guide, it had a value of $500. Needless to say, this kid was jumping up and down with joy, and his friend was excited too. Enter Idiot Father. Idiot Father saw his happy kid and looked annoyed. He asked what was going on. The kid told him he got a $500 card. I confirmed this, and he asked how much he paid for the pack. When the kid told him, he got mad that he wasted $5 on a goddamn pack of cards. I told the kid what had to be done to get the card, and Father was upset that he had to mail something. His reasoning was that they would know where he lived. I told him that this was normal, and it was just to send his son the card. Nope, not having it. I said to him, tell you what, I'll mail it for you and your address will not be known by Upper Deck. I'll give you a receipt, and I'll give you a call when it comes in. He didn't want to do that because I'd have his number. I said, sir, I don't want to hang with you. All I want is for your son to get his card. I then said that I'll give you the receipt for the card and you can come in and pick it up in about 30 days as I would mail it out tomorrow. Nope. I would just tell him that I never got it and sell it and rip him off. I said, okay, how about I give you $100 for it right now and you don't have to do anything? Nope, it was worth $500 and I was ripping him off. He then told the kid that he wasn't smart enough to buy anything because he was being robbed and was an idiot for not realizing it. I tried one last time. I showed him the expiration date, which was in about 2 months, and said that since he had no interest in mailing it in or selling it, he would not be getting anything for it as it would become worthless after that date. Well, he dragged the kid out while insulting the kid and myself, leaving his friend behind to fend for himself. Several months go by, and I never heard if the kid got the card or not. One day I decided to go to the supermarket in the strip mall I was located in and saw the kid with his mother. I asked him if he ever got the card, and he said no. His mother asked, what card? And the kid said nothing. She asked again, and he muttered that he got a good card, and his father wouldn't let him send away for it. He told her what it was worth, and that I offered to buy it, and she got pissed. A few seconds later, here comes idiot father, and he sees me talking to them. She asks him about the card, and he started stammering that I was trying to rip them off and tried to get their address, and that the whole thing was a scam. The look in her eyes could melt the polar caps. She said, "I work 3 jobs, and you sit on your ass all day and you turn down an easy $100 because you're so effing paranoid that you refuse to believe anything?" She asked her son what happened to the card, and the kid told her that the moron ripped it up and threw it out the window of the car. She turns to him and tells him he's walking home because she didn't want to be in the same car with him. Found out it was a 7-mile walk. It was December. I don't know what happened after that, as the kid's friend told me they moved soon after. In my opinion, this story is a great example of how an adult's actions can have negative consequences for a child. It's sad to think that the kid missed out on a potentially valuable card because of his father's paranoia and refusal to follow through with a simple process. It's also heartening to see the mother standing up for her child and taking action against the father's behavior. Overall, it's an interesting and thought-provoking story about the importance of following through on opportunities and not letting fear or mistrust get in the way. The next story is titled, Criminal Karen Tows Unmarked Police Car After They Block Her Property. As a resident of a rural area in the Czech Republic, I had always been accustomed to the peace and quiet that came with living in such an area. However, my peaceful existence was disrupted when a couple, whom I will refer to as Karen and her boyfriend, moved in next door. They were the complete opposite of what one would expect from someone living in the countryside, and it wasn't long before I realized they were up to no good. Karen and her boyfriend were notorious for their loud music, constant screaming, and general disregard for the appearance of their property. It was a total mess, and it wasn't long before it started to attract all sorts of animals. The smell that emanated from their yard was simply unbearable, and I had to keep my windows shut at all times to avoid the stench. I had always tried to keep to myself and avoid confrontations with my neighbors, but Karen made it almost impossible. She had a bad attitude and would always try to start fights with me for no reason. I tried to talk to her on several occasions, but it always ended with her threatening me or throwing garbage at me. One day, as I was returning home from a walk, I noticed several people entering Karen's house, and I realized they were there to buy drugs. I knew it was time to do something about it, but I was hesitant because I knew that Karen and her boyfriend were dangerous. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I decided to call the police. I informed them that my neighbors were cooking and selling meth, and they promised to send someone over as soon as possible. It was a rural area, so it took a while before the police showed up. When the police finally arrived, they parked their unmarked car in front of Karen's house, and that's when things started to get ugly. Karen flew into a rage and threatened to tow the police car because it was blocking her property. She called a tow truck, and when it arrived, the police officers rushed out to stop the driver from towing the car away. The driver argued that he had been called to tow an illegal vehicle, but the police officers quickly showed him their badges and informed him that the car was parked legally. They warned him that if he didn't put the car down immediately, they would arrest him for obstructing a police investigation. Karen continued to rant and rave, and it was clear that she was high on drugs. The police arrested her, and when they entered the house, they discovered a meth cooking operation, illegal weapons, and a ton of drugs. Her boyfriend was also arrested, and it was discovered that he had been on probation for a previous arrest. In the end, Karen and her boyfriend were charged with multiple drug-related offenses and tax fraud. The property owner, who was not Karen, sued them for damages and the cost of cleaning up the property. It was a relief to have them gone, but it was also a sobering reminder that danger could be lurking in even the most peaceful of places. Update. In the years that followed, the community came together to try to prevent anything like this from happening again. The police increased their patrols in the area, and the residents became more vigilant about reporting any suspicious activity. I heard that Karen and her boyfriend were sentenced to a lengthy prison term and would be behind bars for a long time. I also heard that the property was sold to a family who had plans to turn it into a community garden, which was a positive step towards healing and creating a safer environment for all. In my opinion, this story highlights the importance of being aware of one's surroundings and being willing to take action when necessary. It's alarming to think that dangerous criminal activity could be happening right next door without anyone knowing about it. The bravery of the protagonist in reporting Karen and her boyfriend's drug operation to the police is admirable. It's also satisfying to see justice served and the community coming together to prevent anything like this from happening again. Overall, it's a gripping and eye-opening story that serves as a reminder to always stay vigilant. The next story is titled, Neighbors Think My Life Now Revolves Around Them. So, on today's episode of What the Duck from the Neighbors, I need to have them approve when I do things that make any sort of noise. My neighbor just rang my doorbell to tell me his wife said to stop hammering. I was dumbfounded. I just kinda stared and said, "Excuse me?" And he informed me that we would be unable to make any sort of noise for the next few months because of their baby. To which I laughed in his face and closed the door. And now his wife is screaming at my door and he is messaging me to please just do what his wife says. So, some background. My spouse bought this house in 2011. Both houses are single-family detached homes. Both lots are 1.5 lots, so there is 33 feet roughly between our houses compared to the 6 feet for the rest of the street. The neighbor's husband was already in his house. I moved in 8 years ago, shortly after I saw the neighbor for the first time, and it was someone I've known since I was 4. We went to school all the way through high school together. We are 40. 3 years ago, he met someone. She had, at the time, a 2-year-old girl. She would stay at his house, and I would constantly find the kid wandering the streets. They would just send her outside with no supervision, no toys, no fenced yard, and expect her to entertain herself. The child was, and still is, nothing but a brat. 2 years ago, she moved in with her daughter. I run a daycare, so my yard is full of fun toys. But we also have 3 other fenced-off areas, one for our pool in the summer, one for our dogs, and one for our hot tub. All have separate fences and self-closing gates, plus my external fence is 650. During 2020, when COVID hit bad, the kids were doing virtual schooling from home. She never actually did it. She would be ringing my doorbell in the middle of the day, asking me to open my yard for her. I would explain that she can't be here when I have daycare kids and my daughter will come out to play after supper. She went to their backyard, dragged patio furniture to my fence, and climbed in. Who knows how long she was actually in there. But she decided she was done, and then couldn't get out. The latch for my main gate is at the very top, so the babies can't open it when my back is turned. She started screaming. I ran out in a panic, took her home, explained what happened to Mom, and Mom gave me crap for just not allowing her to play. I face a $100,000 fine if she is caught on my property during daycare hours. I explained this. She still snapped and called me an idiot. I left it at that. Happened a handful more times. I started sending them daycare invoices. Still kept happening. I finally told them I would have to call the police next time, which I did. Except this time, Mom and Grandpa were both sitting outside on the stairs and watched her do it. Also, they never bothered to come help her open the gate when she started screaming. Police gave them crap and told them to stop, or Mom would be charged with child endangering. I now have proximity sensors at the top of my fence and get a notification if anything goes over my fence. It's gotten better as she has gotten older, so last summer we set up our above-ground pool. We just ordered a new pump system and heater. The pool was half filled. I had also just done up all my planters. I casually glanced at my security cameras and saw her by the pool. I headed out. The main gate was open as the neighborhood kids were running from yard to yard playing. She took it upon herself to go to the pool and take buckets of soil from my planters and dump it into the pool. There was $400 damage to my brand new $1,000 pump heater system that was up for less than 4 hours. I snapped and screamed at her to get out of my yard and not come back. She is not allowed in my yard at all unless me or my spouse is out there. Now to current time. They had a new baby last week, and me hammering in my basement is disturbing them in their house 33F'd away, and they expect me to wait until the fall to finish my project. So I'm currently sitting on my bench outside, enjoying a glass of water with my outdoor speakers playing metal while I mow the lawn, which is much louder than the little bit of hammering. I'll finish that tonight after dark. In my opinion, this story is a perfect example of why it's important to have good communication with your neighbors. It's unfortunate that the writer has to deal with such difficult neighbors who don't seem to understand boundaries, but it's clear that there were misunderstandings on both sides. I can see how frustrating it must be to have to constantly deal with someone else's child wandering into your yard, especially when it could potentially put you in legal trouble. At the same time, it's understandable that the neighbors would be sensitive to noise with a newborn in the house. It's a tough situation, but hopefully they can come to some kind of understanding and find a way to coexist peacefully. The next story is titled, I left a landlord and property management company at a loss because they tried to nickel and dime me. I know the title is bad, but hear me out. This happened a while ago after I relocated to a new city. I signed a new 1-year lease for a townhouse in the downtown core and really enjoyed where I lived. The townhouse was okay, but a little less nice than I anticipated during my showing. Caveat emptor, I suppose. The only other relevant background is that the lease said the security deposit would be used for the last month's rent and would not be held as a damage deposit. The year passed with very few problems. The water heater went out in the dead of winter, but I stayed in a hotel for 3 nights and offset that cost against the rent after verbally agreeing with the landlord to do so. At the end of the year, the landlord asked if I wanted to renew. I said yes. I was presented with a 1-year extension for the same rent. I signed it and sent it back. I waited about 2 weeks and hadn't received the landlord's signed version back, so I inquired with the management company. They said the landlord was mad because they didn't get rent on the first of the month most of the time. I asked what they were talking about because I always paid on or ahead of time, and they said that while I paid the management company on time, as required by the lease, the management company hadn't gotten it into the landlord's hands in time. I said that wasn't my problem per the lease, but the management company requested $100 more per month on the extension to make up for the inconvenience. They said they would send me a new lease reflecting the $100 increase, which they did. I immediately went out and found a condo in a similarly ideal location that was much nicer and rented for $75 a month less than my existing rent. I went through the background check with them and they sent me a lease to sign. Before signing the new lease, I sent a certified letter to the landlord and the management company of the old location saying my previous signature on the new lease, which had not yet been countersigned, was revoked and ineffective because of their counteroffer and no longer capable of acceptance. I then signed the new lease. At that point, I had about 10 days left on the existing lease. The management company and landlord called me freaking out because they wouldn't be able to find a new tenant in time and would lose revenue. I said, not my problem, hired a moving company, cleaned up the old place, and returned it to them in the same condition I received it. In my opinion, the story highlights the importance of carefully reading and understanding the terms of a lease agreement. It's frustrating to be nickel and dimed by a landlord or property management company, but it's equally important to stand up for one's rights as a tenant. The protagonist's decision to revoke their previous signature on the new lease and find a better deal elsewhere shows that sometimes it's necessary to take matters into one's own hands. However, leaving the old place in good condition and not causing unnecessary harm to the landlord or management company is also commendable. Overall, this story provides valuable lessons for anyone who is renting or looking to rent a property. The last story is titled, A Man Misunderstood a Flight Attendant's Directions and Felt Entitled to a Free Premium Seat because they wouldn't apologize for lying to him. This happened last night, and it was one of the most satisfying encounters I've ever had with someone who had a downright comical sense of entitlement. I took a flight from San Francisco to Boston that was in the afternoon after a full day of work. I had a $200 airline credit to use on just this one flight before I lost it at the end of the year, so I was debating between trying to drink through $200 of free booze over the 6-hour flight or upgrading my seat to the front row. In the end, I decided to go with the seat upgrade and picked the window seat in the absolute front row of the plane with a shameful amount of leg room and an empty middle seat. I never get upgrades, so this felt like quite the luxury to me. Turns out the rest of the plane was completely full, so I was feeling pretty good about this decision. However, I still had some work to do on my laptop and was disappointed that because there were no seats in front, I could not keep my backpack in front of me, and I realized I had to go fight the mob of people still boarding for some overhead bin space before they all filled up. There was a very nice businessman sitting in the aisle seat in my row who stood up to help me. This is relevant later. The overhead bins filled very quickly, at which point the flight attendant at the plane door started announcing, "Overhead bins are almost full, put your bags in the first one you see," to all the people still boarding the plane. Now here comes the last man to board the plane. He's probably about 6'3", and he runs in and kind of shoots the crap with one of the flight attendants for a few minutes, and I'm not paying too much attention besides hoping he's not going to take the middle seat and the fact that he is talking very loudly, and he seems to be a bit drunk. For the rest of the story, I will call this man Dirk, because I don't know what the male version of Karen is. Nobody is in any rush to start getting ready for takeoff, and we soon know why. The pilot gets on the loudspeaker and says that because of the weather in Boston, we need to wait here before we can take off. Now Dirk has stopped talking to the flight attendant and starts to walk down the aisle, sees our empty middle seat and announces, "Cool, I'll take this first seat because it's empty." Throws his backpack down in the space in front of us and slams himself into the middle seat. Now, of course, I wouldn't have minded if someone had purchased the middle seat, but now I'm grumbling a bit internally, thinking about how I spent my airline credit on this upgrade instead of booze, while this guy is going to get the nice seat for free. And nobody immediately came up to him and asked him to move his backpack, so I'm also frustrated that I had to go put mine away, and now his bag is in front of my feet. And finally, Dirk is being extremely loud and vocal. For example, when the pilot came on the loudspeaker again and said we would be waiting 45 minutes before takeoff, Dirk yelled out, "Man, this is some bullcrap!" Stuff like that over and over. So at this point, I haven't said anything to him, but I'm sitting there probably looking like this. It's been about 5 minutes already, not too long, but I'm starting to think they're just going to let this fly. Then comes one of the flight attendants and walks up to this guy and says, "Sir, can I please see your boarding pass?" The man laughs a bit and says he just showed it at the gate, and the flight attendant repeats that he would like to see it. So the man starts rummaging through his backpack and hands the attendant some crumpled up paper and then goes back to his phone. The flight attendant uncrumples it and now starts to look annoyed and goes, "Sir, you just handed me a receipt. Try again." The man starts belly laughing like, "Oh, my bad," and then pulls his boarding pass from his pocket. Of course, he is in 32B, and the flight attendant asks him to go to his assigned seat. Now they start to fight, with Dirk saying, "But the guy said to take the first available seat. Nobody is sitting here anyway." And the attendant repeating that he didn't know how he heard that, but people need to pay to upgrade to these seats, and he needs to go to his assigned seat now. Things started to get heated, and Dirk is full-on screaming now, saying, "Why did he say to take the first available seat then? Why was he lying?" The attendant is yelling back, "This isn't Southwest!" And the rest of the plane is silent and watching. Now at this point, I'm guessing Dirk misinterpreted the guy at the door, saying to throw your bags in the first available overhead bin, but I did not want to get involved and have this potentially drunk man next to me direct his anger at me. Edit. The flight attendant announcing this was being very clear about this being for bags as well, so I think Dirk was just making up excuses. At this point, there are 3 flight attendants in the aisle arguing with Dirk, who is still scream-repeating the same thing about being lied to over and over. They are saying he needs to move or get kicked off the plane, and Dirk is replying that of course he would rather make it home to Boston tonight than get kicked off, but he needs an explanation first as to why they lied to him. In comes a boss of a lady who wasn't taking any of Dirk's crap to join the argument. She interrupts Dirk and says, "Look, you have 2 options. Take your assigned seat or get off the plane. I don't care what you think you heard. I don't know why we are still having this conversation." Then, when Dirk would open his mouth to continue arguing, the lady would hold up her hand and yell, "Ah, ah, ah," like a mother silencing their toddler having a tantrum, and I am sitting there 6 inches away from the action watching this all go down like this. Dirk sits there in silence for a few moments, mouth open, looking at this lady, and then stays sitting in the seat and looks back at his phone and starts mumbling again in a low voice about being lied to. At this point, the 3 flight attendants walk away, and Dirk seems to think that he's won, but lo and behold, 1 minute later, security comes on the plane. Now seeing this, Dirk stands straight up and says, "Okay, I will go take my seat," and starts to walk down the aisle, but they stop him and remove him from the plane, and we didn't see him again. And me and the nice man sitting in the aisle seat ended up getting free drinks for the rest of the flight for our troubles. In my opinion, this story is both entertaining and frustrating at the same time. It's interesting to see how entitled some people can be, and it's satisfying to see that the airline staff didn't back down and let the passenger have his way. However, it's also frustrating to see how some people feel like they deserve things that they haven't paid for and then throw a tantrum when they don't get their way. Overall, it's a good reminder to always follow the rules and treat others with respect, especially when traveling. The next one is an entitled people story. Living in the city had its perks, but finding a parking spot was not one of them. I had an apartment in a lovely building with a private parking lot, which gave me 2 spots. However, my peaceful life was disrupted when a car started parking in front of mine every Friday afternoon, which left me unable to use my car during the weekends. It went on for 5 weeks, and I had to resort to leaving angry notes on the car, which had little effect. As time went by, the car thief became more daring and started parking even during the weekdays. I decided to speak to the building management, who agreed to install cameras to monitor the parking lot. However, this did not deter the car thief, who found new ways to elude the cameras. They started covering the license plate or parking in spots where the cameras couldn't see. I was beyond frustrated, and it seemed like my only options were to keep leaving notes or call the police. But one day, while I was walking to my car, I saw a group of people with a tow truck trying to move the car parked in front of mine. They looked like vigilantes, and I knew that they were not authorized to tow the car. I decided to confront them, and they told me that they were tired of the car thief taking up space in the parking lot and that they were taking matters into their own hands. I knew that this was not the right way to handle the situation, and I warned them against doing anything illegal. I also told them that I had contacted the building management and they were working on a solution. The vigilantes left, but I couldn't help feeling anxious about the situation. I didn't want any trouble, and I certainly didn't want to get involved in any illegal activity. I decided to do some research and found out that there were laws and regulations for private parking lots. I also found out that there were towing companies that specialized in private parking lots, and they had the necessary equipment to tow cars from any level of the parking lot. I contacted one of these companies, and they assured me that they could remove any car from the parking lot, regardless of where it was parked. I also spoke to my neighbors, and they were supportive of my decision to take legal action. We all agreed to chip in and pay for the towing fees, and we waited for the next time the car thief parked illegally. Finally, the day came, and the car thief parked right in front of my spot on a Friday afternoon. I immediately called the towing company, and they sent a truck with the necessary equipment to tow the car. It was an intense operation, but they managed to tow the car from the third level of the parking lot and impound it. The car owner was livid and accused me of theft and vandalism. However, I had followed all the necessary legal procedures, and I had the support of my neighbors. I provided the evidence to the authorities, and the case was settled in my favor. After that incident, there were no more cars parked illegally in the private parking lot. It was a victory for all the residents, and we could finally enjoy the peace of mind that came with having a secure parking spot. However, the car thief had not given up yet. A few months later, I woke up to find my car vandalized. The windows were smashed and the tires were slashed. It was a devastating sight, and I knew that the car thief was behind it. I contacted the authorities, but there was little they could do. I had no evidence that linked the car thief to the vandalism, and it seemed like I was back to square one. However, I didn't give up. I decided to take matters into my own hands and set up a surveillance camera in my parking spot. I purchased a high-quality camera with night vision and motion detection capabilities. I also installed a GPS tracker in my car just in case the car thief decided to strike again. A few weeks passed without any incidents, but one night I received an alert on my phone from the surveillance camera. I quickly checked the footage, and to my surprise, I saw the car thief breaking into my car. They smashed the window and started rummaging through my belongings. I immediately called the police and showed them the footage. They were able to track down the car thief and arrest them. It turned out that they were a professional car thief who had been stealing cars and breaking into them for years. They had no connection to the person who had been parking in front of my spot, and it was just a coincidence that they targeted my car. The car thief was sentenced to several years in prison, and I never had any problems with parking in the private lot again. I felt relieved and safe, knowing that I had taken all the necessary precautions to protect my car. In an update, the building management decided to hire a security guard to patrol the parking lot at night, and they also installed more cameras to monitor the entire lot. The residents were pleased with the new security measures, and we felt safer and more secure. In conclusion, it was a challenging experience, but I learned that there are legal ways to handle parking issues in private parking lots. It's essential to be vigilant and proactive in protecting our property, and not to resort to illegal activities or take matters into our own hands. I'm grateful that I was able to resolve the situation and that justice was served in the end. In my opinion, this story highlights the frustration that many city dwellers face when it comes to finding a parking spot. It's a relatable experience that can lead to some creative solutions, like using jacks to move a car parked illegally. However, it's important to remember that taking the law into your own hands is not the answer. The protagonist's decision to research and follow legal procedures was a smart move that ultimately led to a positive outcome. It's a great reminder that there are ways to solve problems without resorting to vigilante justice. The next story is titled, "The HOA Sued Me Over My Year-Round Garden, But We Fought Back and Won, A Story of Resilience and Triumph." My husband and I had always dreamed of owning our own home, and after years of saving, we finally found the perfect house in a beautiful neighborhood with a homeowners association, HOA. The neighborhood was well kept, and the HOA seemed like a great idea, but we soon realized that they had nothing better to do than harass people with different cultures and religions. My husband is an avid gardener and takes great pride in his work. Our house is always decorated with beautiful flowers and greenery. However, it wasn't long before we started receiving threatening letters from the HOA board members, stating that something he had outside was against policy or unsightly or distracting. We quickly realized that they were discriminating against us for our different culture and religion, even though he was Indian and I was white. The first time we received a letter, it was for a small statue of a Hindu goddess that my husband had placed in the garden. They claimed that it didn't maintain a harmonious relationship with the houses around it. We thought it was ridiculous, but we complied and removed the statue. But things only got worse from there. Every time my husband put up a new decoration or planted new flowers, we would receive another letter from the HOA. They claimed that his decorations were a nuisance to the neighbors, even though we knew for a fact that no one had complained. One day, my husband received a letter stating that he had to remove all of the decorations from our garden because they were against the HOA's rules and regulations. My husband was devastated. Gardening was his passion, and he couldn't bear the thought of removing all of his hard work. He decided to attend the next HOA meeting to voice his concerns. When we arrived, we were met with judgmental stares from the board members. My husband explained that the decorations were for religious purposes, but they didn't care. They dismissed us, stating that we had to pay a fine for the decorations that we hadn't removed. We tried to reason with them, but it was no use. They seemed to have it out for us, and we couldn't understand why. My husband was at a loss, but I wasn't going to let them get away with their discrimination. I started to research the HOA's rules and regulations and found that they were extremely broad and didn't specify any guidelines for garden decorations. I also found that the HOA had a history of discriminating against people of different cultures and religions. Armed with this information, we decided to take them to court. It was a long and stressful process, but we were determined to fight back against their discrimination. We hired a lawyer and presented our case to the judge. We had pictures of the garden decorations as well as evidence of the HOA's discriminatory practices. After hearing our case, the judge was appalled by the HOA's behavior. He agreed with our case of discrimination and awarded us a large sum of $39,000 in damages. We were elated. We had won against the HOA's discrimination. But our fight wasn't over yet. A few weeks after the court hearing, we received another letter from the HOA. They claimed that we owed them money for damage to the lawn during the court hearing. We knew it was just another attempt to get money out of us, so we took them to court again. This time, we were even more prepared. We had evidence that the damage to the lawn had been there before the hearing, and that the HOA was trying to extort us for money. The judge once again saw through their tactics and ruled in our favor. Not only did we not have to pay for the supposed damage, but the judge also ordered the HOA to pay our legal fees. The victory felt sweet, but it was bittersweet. We couldn't help but feel like we were still being singled out by the HOA. We noticed that other neighbors had similar decorations in their gardens, but they never received any letters or fines. It seemed like the HOA was still targeting us, even after our victory in court. We decided to take matters into our own hands and reach out to the other neighbors. We found out that many of them felt the same way we did, and were also being unfairly targeted by the HOA. We formed a neighborhood group to fight back against the HOA's discrimination. Together, we attended HOA meetings and presented a united front. We called out their discriminatory practices and demanded that they change their policies. We also reached out to local news outlets and brought attention to the issue. The HOA was finally forced to listen. They met with us and agreed to revise their policies to be more inclusive of different cultures and religions. They also agreed to drop all fines and fees that had been unfairly imposed on us and our neighbors. It was a long and difficult journey, but we had finally achieved what we set out to do. We had fought back against discrimination and won. Our garden was once again filled with beautiful decorations, and we could finally enjoy our home without fear of harassment from the HOA. But our fight had also inspired others. We received messages from people all over the country who had faced similar discrimination from their HOAs. We realized that our victory was just the beginning of a larger movement to fight against discrimination and prejudice. We continued to speak out against discrimination in our community and beyond. We shared our story and encouraged others to fight back against injustice. We even started a nonprofit organization to support those who were facing discrimination from their HOAs. Our victory had not only changed our lives, but had also inspired others to stand up for their rights. We were proud to be a part of something bigger than ourselves and to have made a positive impact on the world. In my opinion, this story is a great example of how standing up against discrimination and injustice can make a real difference. It's heartening to see how the protagonist and their neighbors refused to be bullied by the HOA and fought back against their unfair policies. It's also inspiring to see how their victory led to a larger movement against discrimination. This story shows that even in the face of adversity, it's possible to make positive changes in the world if we stand together and fight for what's right. The next story is titled, Standing Firm for My Seat. I was looking forward to my lunch break and decided to try out a new cafe near my office. As I entered, I noticed it was quite busy, but luckily there was a spot at the end of a communal table. I ordered my food and settled in to enjoy my meal. Soon, 2 women asked if they could sit next to me. I happily obliged, leaving an empty seat between us. However, things took a turn when 2 more customers came in and asked me to move so they could sit together. I was taken aback by their request. After all, I had already accommodated the 2 women and I had arrived before any of them. Why should I have to move? I politely refused, explaining that I had been there first and had already made room for the other customers. But they were not willing to listen. They started giving me dirty looks and whispering to each other. I tried to ignore them and focus on my food, but their behavior was making me uncomfortable. Suddenly, one of them snapped at me, calling me selfish and inconsiderate. I couldn't believe it. I was simply trying to enjoy my meal and had already made concessions for the other customers. I stood my ground and calmly explained that I had every right to be there. However, the other customers were not willing to back down. They kept insisting that I move, and their voices grew louder and more aggressive. I started feeling intimidated and vulnerable as the entire cafe was now looking at me. It was at this point that the manager of the cafe stepped in. She asked what was going on, and I explained the situation. To my surprise, she took the side of the other customers, saying that it would be more convenient for them to sit together. I was shocked and outraged. I had paid for my food and had every right to enjoy it in peace. But the manager wouldn't budge. She started insisting that I move and even threatened to call the police if I didn't comply. At this point, I was feeling overwhelmed and helpless. I didn't know what to do. That's when a regular customer spoke up. She had been sitting at a table nearby and had witnessed the entire exchange. She came over and stood by my side, saying that she had seen me make room for the other customers, and that I was in the right. This seemed to make the manager reconsider. She apologized for the misunderstanding and offered to buy me a drink on the house. I accepted, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of injustice. As I sat there sipping my drink, I thought about what had just happened. I had stood up for myself, but it had come at a price. I wondered how many other people had been in similar situations and had been forced to give up their rights. Days went by, and I couldn't stop thinking about the incident. Finally, I decided to take action. I wrote a letter to the cafe's management explaining what had happened and suggesting that they implement a policy to prevent such situations from occurring in the future. To my surprise, I received a response within a few days. The management apologized again and said that they had discussed the matter with their staff. They promised to create a policy that would ensure that customers would be treated fairly and with respect. But the most satisfying outcome came a few weeks later. I returned to the same cafe for lunch, and as I was paying my bill, the manager approached me. She apologized again for what had happened and told me that they had implemented a new policy that guaranteed customers the right to keep their seats if they had arrived first. I was pleased and relieved. It felt good to know that my actions had made a difference, and that I had helped to create positive change. I left the cafe with a sense of pride and empowerment, knowing that I had stood up for myself and for others who might find themselves in similar situations. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, I returned to the same cafe for lunch. As I walked in, I noticed that the communal table had been replaced by smaller, individual tables. I smiled to myself, knowing that my letter had helped to create real change. As I sat down at one of the new tables, I overheard a conversation between 2 customers. They were talking about the incident that had happened a few weeks ago, and how the cafe had implemented a new policy as a result. One of the customers turned to me and said, "Hey, aren't you the one who stood up for your seat?" I smiled and nodded, feeling proud that my actions had made an impact on the community. It was a small victory, but it had taught me an important lesson. Sometimes standing up for yourself and for what is right can make all the difference. Update. A few months later, I received an email from the manager of the cafe. She thanked me again for bringing the issue to their attention and for helping to create a positive change. She also invited me to meet with her and the staff to discuss further improvements that could be made to ensure that all customers felt welcome and respected. I accepted the invitation, and we had a productive discussion about ways to create a more inclusive and supportive environment. We talked about things like training staff to be more sensitive to customers' needs, providing resources for customers who might need extra assistance, and creating a more diverse and inclusive menu. It was an inspiring conversation, and I left the cafe feeling grateful and hopeful. It was a reminder that sometimes small actions can have big consequences, and that standing up for yourself and for others can create positive change that ripples out into the world. In my opinion, this story is a great example of the importance of standing up for oneself. It's frustrating to be in a situation where you're being pushed around and made to feel uncomfortable, but it's empowering to see someone who is able to hold their ground and assert their rights. The fact that the author was able to make a positive change by speaking up and taking action is a testament to the power of individual action. It's a reminder that even small actions can have a big impact, and that we all have the ability to make a difference in the world. The last story is titled, "The Time My Neighbor Called Cops and Tried to Get Me Arrested for No Reason." Background. My husband and I moved into our new house in a quiet suburban neighborhood in September of 2021. We were excited to start a new chapter in our lives, but little did we know that our neighbor from hell, NFH, would make our lives a living nightmare. From the start, NFH was an issue. She had already come down to our house to try and claim that her lease included our personal laundry room, which was obviously not the case. She had even admitted to trying to break into our house to use our laundry facilities. It was clear that she was not going to be an easy neighbor to deal with. Fast forward to February of 2022, my husband and I returned home after being out of state for a few days. We rented a car for the trip, and when we arrived home, we found that the snow had piled up to around 2 feet. NFH hadn't bothered to clear any snow, which meant that we couldn't park in the driveway. My husband started clearing the sidewalks while I waited in the car. As he was doing so, I noticed NFH glaring at me from her window with an intense and menacing look. Once my husband finished clearing the sidewalks, including hers, we emptied our rental car and went inside to change before he could shovel the driveway. However, before he could start shoveling, NFH's dad showed up and blocked our everyday driver in with their Suburban. He immediately began to insult and belittle my husband, calling him a punk-ass little crap, and claiming that he deserved respect because he was 50 years old. It was clear that this man was trying to intimidate us, but my husband refused to back down. The situation escalated quickly, and NFH's dad claimed that my husband had threatened to assault him. I quickly grabbed my phone and started recording the altercation as her dad continued to make outrageous claims. Meanwhile, NFH was screaming and crying, holding her baby and claiming that she was being assaulted. It was a complete and utter overreaction, and we knew that it was only a matter of time before the police showed up. As we had suspected, 3 police officers showed up, and they were clearly familiar with NFH. They tried to talk her down, but she wouldn't listen. She kept screaming and demanding that I be arrested, claiming that I was a prostitute and that they needed to arrest me. It was an outrageous and baseless claim, but she wouldn't let it go. The police eventually spoke to us and told us that they would likely be evicting NFH soon. However, things only got worse from there. NFH continued to act entitled, and we soon found out that she had been spreading rumors about us to our other neighbors. Days later, we received a notice from our homeowners association, HOA, claiming that we had violated several rules and regulations. It was clear that NFH had made false claims about us to the HOA, and we knew that we had to take action. We decided to hire a lawyer to help us deal with the situation, and we eventually were able to clear our names. It turned out that NFH had been spreading lies and rumors about us to other neighbors as well, and we knew that we had to take action to protect ourselves. Update. Months later, we found out that NFH had been evicted from her home due to multiple violations of her lease agreement. We were relieved to hear this news, but we also knew that we had to be vigilant in the future to ensure that we were not victimized again. We learned a valuable lesson from this experience and knew that we had to be prepared to stand up for ourselves and protect our home and our reputation. After the incident with NFH, we took extra precautions to ensure that we were always documenting any interactions with our neighbors. We installed security cameras around our property and made sure to keep records of any disputes or confrontations. We also made an effort to get to know our other neighbors better and build stronger relationships with them. Over time, we were able to move on from the ordeal with NFH, but it was not easy. We had to deal with the aftermath of her false accusations and the damage that it did to our reputation. However, we were determined to not let her actions define us, and to show that we were good neighbors who respected the rules and regulations of our community. In the end, we were able to come out stronger from this experience. We learned the importance of standing up for ourselves and protecting our rights as homeowners. We also learned the value of having a strong support system in the form of our other neighbors and our lawyer. We hope that our experience can serve as a cautionary tale for others who may be dealing with difficult neighbors and encourage them to take action to protect themselves and their homes. In my opinion, this story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of dealing with difficult neighbors. It's amazing how one person's actions can have such a negative impact on those around them. The fact that NFH tried to frame the narrator for a crime they didn't commit is outrageous and shows just how far some people will go to get what they want. It's great to see that the narrator took action to protect themselves and their home, and that justice was eventually served. Overall, this story is a reminder that we should always be prepared to stand up for ourselves and protect our rights, especially when dealing with difficult neighbors. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.